Coming up on the NESN Bruins Podcast, we unpack what was an eventful weekend for the Bruins, featuring a couple of stolen points from Jake DeBrusk, 4 goals from David Pastrnak, and take a look ahead to what promises to be an exciting week for the Bruins as they have 1 game against the Tampa Bay Lightning and 2 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Hey everybody, welcome into the NESN Bruins Podcast. I'm NESN.com's Logan Mullen. That's right, I am hosting this week. No Mike Cole this week. Mike is off to greener pastures, I guess, and by that he's on vacation somewhere for a period of time. But we have a pinch hitter, if you will, I guess a healthy scratch that's getting into the lineup to make it more hockey-centric. NESN.com's Adam London joins me this week. Adam, how's it going?
It's going. Happy to be here.
All right. Well, good to have you. So since we met last, we being us and the podcast listeners, the Bruins were wrapping up their road trip in Colorado. That was their first loss of the season, a somewhat controversial one with some layers that we'll get to in a little bit. But since then, it's been a convincing 3-0 win over the New Jersey Devils, and then probably even more convincing in some respects, a 4-2 victory over the Anaheim Ducks on Monday, in which David Pastrnak scored all four Boston goals. So that's kind of where we'll pick up this week. So with the hot start that Pasternak's gotten off to this year, he has 6 goals and 4 assists through 6 games. A lot of people already floating the idea of, is this when David Pastrnak finally takes the leap and joins the typically rare company of players who score 50 goals in a season at least once? Last year it was Alex Ovechkin and then Leon Draisaitl from the Edmonton Oilers. So let's kick things off this week, talk about ceilings. For me, I think David Pastrnak reaching 50 goals might be a bit of a reach, but if he stays healthy this year, who knows? This is obviously a tough pace to keep up with right now, a goal per game. I think that might be a little bit lofty of an expectation, but how far-fetched do you think it is?
Yeah, no, I'm on the same page as you, and I think this is the point of Pasta at his career when we'd like to see him become more of a consistent player. You know, because early on, you really see him score his goals in bunches, and it seems like sometimes when he's, dragging a little bit, he gets discouraged, and you see his play affected that way. So, seeing Pasta, spread out his goals and whatnot, that'd be pretty encouraging.
I'd be interested to see if he shuffles up and down the lineup a little bit at all this year, because I feel like we've gotten to the point where the top line is such a wagon that you more or less know what he's going to be able to produce. Last year he had that thumb injury, hand injury, limited him to 66 games, but he still had a career high 38 goals. So when you add another, 16 games into there, that's another 12 goals that he would have needed. That's really not that much of a reach. So in my opinion, if they end up shifting him a little bit, you have to put him with David Krejci in order to try and even out the scoring a little bit. That might adversely affect it a little bit, but because of how top-heavy the Bruins have been, not just this year, but in particular this year and lately, that might have to be an idea that they toy with. Now, part of the reason we brought you in, kind of not really, is you are to Jake DeBrusk what I am to Joakim Nordstrom.
Yes.
You're about as unapologetic of a Jake DeBrusk fan, supporter, whatever you want to call it, as they come. So far, if I'm correct, he has just 1 assist.
Correct.
Very slow start, obviously a little uncharacteristic. His rookie year very quickly broke out, and then last year he just never really quite got going. Do you think we're kind of seeing what Jake DeBrusk is? Like last year was more what he's supposed to be, and his rookie year is the aberration. What do you make of it so far?
Yeah, I think Jake DeBrusk, out of all these guys, really could have made the case that he could have benefited the most from a hot start, just because, last year he came into the season, second season in the league, with a ton of expectations. Wasn't a dreadful season by any means, but he didn't take the leap that many expected him to. Colorado could have been that game that, it got him going, and had a goal and an assist, both wiped away by review. And he didn't hide from his frustrations after the game. He said, I'm pissed off. Just things weren't going his way. But it was pretty encouraging to see him bounce back against the Devils. He picked up his first point of the season, an assist on Bergeron's first goal of the year. And it was he was grinding away in front of the net, was able to pass it over to Bergeron. And you just hope that he builds off that. I mean, this is a guy that can't afford to get discouraged because they're having, problems on the second line anyways, with Krejci being out. So this can be a time now where DeBrusk kind of shoulders responsibilities and, gives them a boost that they need.
Yeah, and last year, it is kind of tough to get on him. So he played 2 fewer games last year than he did his rookie year, and he only had 1 fewer point. He actually was a more prolific goal scorer. He had 27 last year, but he really did disappear for stretches, which was kind of the problem. And you see it with a lot of the younger guys that the Bruins have trotted through the lineup lately, where, take your pick between DeBrusk, Danton Heinen, Peter Cehlarik. They show these pops of offense, and I'd say DeBrusk certainly is at a further level offensively than the other 2 I just listed. But when he disappears, it's a problem, especially because of how the second line right wing situation has played out so far. So him sort of taking another step and being maybe a 50-point scorer this year is certainly it would benefit the Bruins in a big way. I don't think that's that much of a hot take. But how much do you think the confidence, I guess, is playing into it? After the Colorado game, here's part of the quote, is anytime that you get production finally and it gets taken away from you twice, it's just one of those things where I almost don't believe it, but at the same time, that's how things are going for me. And if you watch the clip, he was visibly dejected. Yeah. So especially if he starts having, say Par Lindholm centering his line, depending on how long Krejci's out. How long do you think this keeps up?
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is when you think about now, obviously it's a time DeBrusk needs to find a way out of this funk. And if you find yourself in a situation where Lindholm is centering that line, Lindholm's not really a guy that's going to create a ton of opportunities for you. He's pretty good offensively or defensively, but he's not, known for his playmaking. So it's really on DeBrusk now to kind of take it upon himself to figure it out. And I guess this could be a stretch if Krejci's out for any amount of time where we start to figure out, who DeBrusk really is.
Yeah, so let's jump to that real quick because we've alluded to it a few times. So David Krejci, a little under 5 minutes of ice time Monday. He skated 7 shifts and then left the game. He did practice. We're recording this Wednesday. He did practice today. Bruce Cassidy said that Krejci's nursing an upper body injury and that he might be able to be in the lineup Thursday against the Lightning. He also might not be. He wasn't able to commit either way. So during practice, they had Charlie Coyle move up to the second line, and Brett Ritchie also moved up to the second line. So it was DeBrusk, Coyle, and Ritchie, and then the third line was Danton Heinen, Carson Coleman, and then Par Lindholm and David Backes were taking turns centering the third line. So Bruce Cassidy didn't sound overly concerned about David Krejci's status. He might not be able to play Thursday, but it doesn't sound like he'll be out for a long period of time. But this is already the second injury for Krejci this year. Sometimes these things have a tendency to pile up, so the Bruins might have to start figuring out options for what happens if David Krejci isn't available for any period of time. Let's start with you. So thoughts on the idea of having Coyle move up?
Yeah, we're focusing a lot of this talk about slow starts on DeBrusk. And, Coyle is in that mix as well. He picked up an assist in the first game of the season, but it's kind of been quiet ever since then. And this could be a way of Cassidy giving Coyle an opportunity to get going. And then when Krejci is reinserted, hopefully Coyle is bringing that production back down to the third line.
So my take on Coyle has always been that he's a good second line center. He's a great third line center. Sure. So for me, I would almost rather see the Bruins take a chance with Par Lindholm. I guess David Backes. I'm not a huge fan of David Backes centering lines at this point in his career, but I would rather see Par Lindholm on that second line, and you allow your third line at least to be most likely matching up better than the opposition. Now, with the way that DeBrusk has started, maybe you have to put Coyle on the second line and know that you're going to get probably a little bit more offensive opportunity than you otherwise would, considering who the other options are. But at a certain point, Jake DeBrusk is in his third year. There's only so much mountains you can move in order to help get him going. To Bruce Cassidy's credit, he really hasn't taken away much ice time. The last few games, DeBrusk has hovered right around 16 minutes. In the Anaheim game, he did go down to 12 minutes, which is a little bit shocking, but at the same time, they had to mess with the lineups once David Krejci left. I think that basically their hand has been forced where they have to basically take away from one line to add to another. And against a team like the Lightning that trots out 3 very solid centers, you more or less have to make do with what you have.
Yeah, and it almost seems, for a player who obviously hasn't been around the Bruins very often, it almost seems like Cassidy knows what he has with Lindholm.
Right.
Where he knows he'll be, a steady guy on that second line, isn't going to be, exposed. And it wouldn't be, I know he had Coyle and Ritchie on that second line today, but you can make the argument that Lindholm up there with DeBrusk and Coleman might actually be the safer bet where you have, especially against those high-powered offenses where you could use that second-line defense. But it should be interesting to see which way it goes.
Well, yeah, and that second line, too. I mean, Lindholm's a good skater, and then if they had Coleman on the third line during practice today, I kind of think if they put him on the second line, I mean, you have a lot of very good skaters and guys who are good at hunting pucks, which that maybe at least gives you something against Tampa. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of seeing Brett Ritchie on the second line. That is a move that kind of reeks of desperation. I guess it makes a little bit more sense if you have David Krejci centering that second line, and then you can afford to mess with that style of play, but you're really not giving Charlie Coyle much to work with if you're giving him an ice-cold Jake DeBrusk and then Brett Ritchie, who, for what he's capable of doing, great offense is not necessarily one of those things.
And you'd be going really heavy on that second line, too, when you have 2 big bodies in Coyle and Ritchie that, DeBrusk probably wouldn't benefit tremendously from that.
Yeah. But by all accounts, I think it's going to be Tuukka Rask who is going to be in goal Thursday against the Lightning. At this point, it really doesn't matter who's in goal. So I don't have the leaders up in front of me. I know that both Tuukka Rask and Jarl Halak are top 5 in the NHL, both in goals against average and save percentage. Obviously, save percentage is a little bit better of an indicator of how a goalie's playing. But what pace do we think is sustainable for both of these guys? I mean, we've definitely seen the NHL trend in the direction where teams that are able to play 2 goalies relatively equally are the ones who are going to have the most success, both during the regular season and over the course of a postseason as well. The Bruins certainly are in that position. How evenly do you think the split should be, and how long do you think the current paces that they're at are sustainable?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, last year, often you kind of just view these backup goaltenders as place fillers or for the star to get back in there. But coming off the Halak's first season with the Bruins, it was his highest save percentage in 5 years. There's real expectations for this guy now. And for that reason alone, you could easily justify a pretty even split over the course of the regular season. And we saw last year how much Rask benefited from, having a little bit lighter of a workload. He didn't really take any dips throughout the postseason. So yeah, I really don't think you can have an argument as far as too much of a gap between these two guys as far as starts go.
Right, and so I'll be curious to see, Tuukka Rask typically every late October, some point in November, flames out quite a bit. We're rapidly approaching that period of time. As of now, he's second in the NHL with a .957 save percentage. Jarl Halak is 4th with a .951 save percentage. I feel like eventually these sample sizes are going to start, the balance is going to be off. Tuukka Rask will probably go cold at some point. They're going to have to lean on Halak more. He'll come back down to earth. Keeping up a north of .950 save percentage is a challenge in its own right, so it'd be pretty unfair to expect them to do that. But I think that the paces that they're at now are sustainable within reason, where you're keeping both of them fresh enough at this point to where you can count on them every other game. I mean, the Bruins are about to play Tampa Bay on Thursday. They'll play Toronto on Saturday. And gone are the days where they need to trot out Tuukka for both.
Right. No, and you talked about Tuukka's numbers leveling out. There's a good chance it happens this week. I mean, he's going to start Thursday against the Lightning. He'll get one of the 2 starts probably against the Leafs, which is Saturday and Tuesday, I believe. Mm-hmm. I mean, but obviously we all know both those teams feature pretty high-powered offenses. So this stretch upcoming now will be, and you could see when you see Rask drop into his kind of patent early season struggles.
Yeah, so to that point, the upcoming week, how much stock do we put into it? So it is the Lightning tomorrow, Thursday, the Maple Leafs on the road on Saturday, and then the Maple Leafs at home on Tuesday. It's October. The standings are still narrow. Sample sizes are small. How much or how little stock should we put into this week, especially when you consider the Lightning are off to a relatively slow start?
Yeah, I'm looking more forward the Maple Leafs, just because it almost feels like we're testing fate with these two teams. How it's like, how many years in a row are we going to see these Bruins and the Leafs meet in the playoffs, and the Bruins knock off the Leafs in heartbreaking fashion for Toronto? And at some point, it's going to piss off Toronto to a great extent, where these games are going to matter, a ton for them, and they're going to be looking to make a statement. And it might not feel like it is a lot right now, but it's something to build on as we, drift towards the season, and maybe another meeting in the postseason where it's like, look, we have this success against these guys now. We know we can do it. So I think Toronto's not going to take these matchups lightly at all.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty much expected that the Lightning will turn things around. I think it's probably an anomaly that they started off the season wherever they're at right now. Through 6 games, they're 3-2-1, which is 4th place in the conference. They're just 2 points behind Toronto, which has played an extra game for 3rd place. But yeah, I'm skeptical of reading into it too much, but at the same time, the one that always sticks out to me, and granted, this was late November, so if you go back to November of 2017, when Tuukka Rask got off to his really bad start, they put Khudobin in net, and then they decided a pretty, I guess, unusual or shocking decision at the time, that for this Thursday game against the Lightning, they were in late November, they were going to play Tuukka Rask. And he played great, and they ended up winning, and that's when Rask went on that lengthy multi-month run where he was just unstoppable. That was a season-defining game, and it happened in November.
Right.
I'm not saying that we might see a season-altering game on, whatever tomorrow's going to be, October 17th, or one of these games. At the same time, when you consider how close these teams are expected to be in the standings, these October games still matter. I mean, the Sabres are off to a good start. You know what the Maple Leafs are. You know what the Lightning are. The Panthers will probably be better than they are. The Canadiens will probably be better than they are right now. Some of these games might matter later on, and especially, for mental aspects alone, for being able to say, okay, yeah, we did go and roll through the Maple Leafs. I mean, you looked at last year, the Bruins had tremendous success against the Maple Leafs in the regular season, and it took them 7 games, but that continued into the postseason. So I don't think it should be totally dismissed. Any other thoughts on that?
No, and like you said, you look across any sport, divisional matchups bring the most out of these guys.
Right.
And you saw last season in that stretch where Rask was playing pretty poorly and then turned it around. You wonder if he would have been able to if it was against, a middle of the road or even like a bad team, because these guys, you see it a lot of times with Rask, he steps up when he needs to, and it really brings the most out of these guys. So it really, with like you said, with how close these teams are expected to be in the standings, it really doesn't matter when on the calendar they square off.
Yeah, well, and also the way the schedules have shifted now, where the last time the Bruins and Maple Leafs play is going to be November 15th.
Yeah.
I think last year they at least made it to January, but now all these games are being shifted earlier. The Bruins and Lightning, they'll play tomorrow, they'll play December 12th, and they'll play on March 3rd. Yeah. So it's not like you hit the last month of the season. It's division game, division game, division game. Those days are gone. So speaking of out-of-division games, so one of the victories that the Bruins had over the weekend was against the New Jersey Devils. If you will give me the space to float a take that I've had baking in the oven for a little bit, I think it's ready to take it out of the oven, unearth it to the world. So probably flew under the radar. He didn't exactly have a eye-popping performance like anyone else on the Devils. One player that I have had an eye out for a while and think could be a potentially good fit for the Bruins. So right now, I guess for a little bit of context, the Devils are winless. I think they are the worst team in the NHL.
They got a point or minus 16 point differential, which is very
tough.
much in the cellar of the
Yep.
NHL.
So they have 4 regulation losses, 2 overtime losses. It'll be curious to see how long John Hines survives this. There's a fake tweet that floated around that said he had been fired. A lot of people bit that. He has not been fired, at least as of 1:57 this afternoon when we've recorded this podcast. It was a busy offseason for the Devils, who went out and got PK Subban, they got Wayne Simmons, they drafted Jack Hughes. A lot of people had pretty high expectations for them. So far, they have flamed out. I don't even know if the flame was on at any point. No. But outside of hype, I guess. But it'll be fascinating to see if they become sellers a couple months down the road. Now, I am a little reticent to start writing teams off after what the St. Louis Blues did last year, and we're in a far worse position, 2 months from where we currently sit now. However, just an idea I want to float, the name Blake Coleman. He has been responsible for what I think is the goal of the season so far, and I guess it was New Jersey's 3rd game, which was against the Winnipeg Jets, the one that he put past Hellebuck as he was falling. But he's a nice middle 6 winger. He makes $1.8 million a year. He's under contract this year and next. And for a team like the Bruins that are starving for, I guess, right wing help on the second and or third lines, basically depends on how they make up their lineup on a given night, I think he could be a good fit. He had 22 goals and 14 assists last year for 36 points. That was over 78 games, and that was on a very bad New Jersey Devils team. The Bruins and Devils have done business recently, and I feel like it worked out pretty well for both sides. The Bruins got Marcus Johansson last year, but I could very much see a guy like Blake Coleman with a relatively low cap hit being able to fit in somewhere in the second or third line for the Bruins. Now, this is way down the road, but that my mind was jogged a little bit, if you will.
Yeah, no, and the past couple seasons, you've seen the Bruins enter campaigns kind of as, contenders, fringe contenders. They're favorites this year. I mean, they're not going to, and knowing that Sweeney's, we've seen in the past, he's not going to hesitate when he thinks there's a move to be made that can help this team out. So, if they're starving for that secondary scoring or help on either of those second or third lines, I mean, you have to expect Sweeney will consider any and all options. And if the Devils' trajectory stays as poor as it is, I mean, they could look to move Coleman.
Now, there is one problem with Blake Coleman. He wears number 20. And number 20 is currently being worn by a player who it'll probably go to the rafters once he gives it up, right, in Joakim Nordstrom. So he'll have to cede that number. Any parting thoughts?
On Nordstrom, no.
On Nordstrom, no. Any other parting thoughts?
No, I'm very much looking forward to this upcoming swing for the Bruins. Like we said, 1 against Tampa Bay, 2 against Toronto. And I think this is, like we said, it shouldn't put a ton of stock in it. It's not obviously a make or break by any means, but it should offer a good idea of what these Bruins are made of.
I like fall hockey. Every time I say that, Mike just sits here and is all predictably grumbly about it. It's like, it's October, whatever. I like fall hockey. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it sure will be.
All right, let's head out. All right, thanks for listening. We'll most likely see you next week with plenty to unpack. If Mike decides he just doesn't want to come back anymore, then this might be the tandem from here on out. Otherwise, thanks for filling in, Adam.
Happy to be here anytime.
All right, see y'all later.